Why did the enemy know her name? And why, just before the ambush began, did she hear a voice on the Taliban's own radio frequency describe her as the laughing ghost? Captain Sarah Martinez didn't have answers yet, but she could still hear the words echo in her headset, wrapped in that accented English, the kind that didn't come from a mountain fighter with a battered rifle, but from someone educated, patient, and deliberate, someone who had been listening to her for far too long. The darkness over Afghanistan's Kunar province clung to the mountains like wet cloth. The air thin and cold at this altitude. Above the ridgelines, her AH-64 Apache rolled left, rotor blades biting into the night, the green glow from her night vision goggles turned the jagged world below into an eerie alien landscape. Every boulder, every patch of scrub, every shadow on the valley wall was a potential rifle barrel. She'd flown this terrain for months. She knew the ridges, the river, cuts, the way sound bounced off the stone, so gunfire came from everywhere at once. She also knew that familiarity was dangerous. The enemy had learned to read the same terrain. Phoenix, this is Overwatch. Major Lisa Chun's voice cracked through her headset. It was clipped, but heavy with urgency. Multiple heat signatures moving toward Grid 41 SMB 12345. Looks like a coordinated attack on Outpost Bravo. Sarah's hands moved over the controls automatically. Copy that. Overwatch. Phoenix inbound. 8-3. Minutes. Below her, in the front seat, Warrant Officer Jake Bulldog Williams was already dancing his fingers across the targeting systems, eyes locked into the green and black world of his own display. They'd flown so many missions together by now. Sarah didn't need to tell him what to check. He was already ahead of her, plotting firing solutions, reading enemy movement like a second language. The thermal display painted Outpost Bravo in pale white heat. Reinforced sandbag lines, small prefab structures clinging to the hilltop like stubborn teeth, all of it overlooking a vital supply route. The flashes of muzzle fire glittered along the surrounding ridge like a storm of angry fireflies. The heat signatures were clear, dozens of insurgents closing in from three sides. Bulldog, you seeing this? Sarah's voice was calm. Too calm for the chaos playing out in front of them. She'd learned early that calm wasn't just for herself. It was for every soldier who might hear her over comms. Roger that, Bulldog drawled, still sounding like they were back in Texas rather than threading an attack helicopter through the Hindu Kush at night. 2 MG positions on the East Ridge. Got an RPG team hauling up the south face. Permission to light him up? Sarah eased the Apache into a steep dive, engines screaming as the bird's nose came down. This was the part she lived for when ground troops under siege heard the low heartbeat of rotor blades and knew that hell was about to come down in their favor. Light them up, Bulldog. Let's show 'em why they call us the Angel of Death. The chain gun beneath the Apache's nose opened up 625 rounds per minute of armor-piercing fire. Each tracer was a bright thread, stitching the sky to the earth, reaching down with brutal precision. The first MG nest disappeared in a cloud of rock and dust. The second fell silent seconds later, but then Sarah saw it something that didn't fit the usual pattern. Instead of scattering in panic, a cluster of insurgents stayed in place. Through her NVG glow, she caught the rectangular shapes devices, not weapons aimed upward. Bulldog, eastern slope, about 200 meters from that MG nest. You seeing this? A pause as he slewed his optics. Holy Phoenix, they're filming us. Night vision, maybe thermal. The words chilled her. Taliban fighters didn't stand in the open to record unless something else was at play. Her crosshairs found the RPG Team Hellfire missiles away. Orange bloom, lighting the ridge. Even as the explosion faded, she saw more electronic signatures blinking across the battlefield. This isn't just another raid, she told Overwatch. They're studying us. Outpost Bravo came back with gratitude over the net, calling her a lifesaver. but the words barely touched her. She couldn't stop thinking about those calm insurgents, holding their devices steady while the battlefield tore itself apart around them. 3 months in theater, and she'd earned the kind of respect you don't fake. Her call sign, Phoenix, was spoken like a prayer by ground troops. To the enemy, it was a curse. But tonight, for the first time, she wondered if she'd been the prey all along. The briefing room smelled like stale coffee and hot electronics. Major Elisa Chun was hunched over stacks of intercepted comms and satellite imagery, the kind of mosaic only an intelligence officer could decipher. Sarah walked in still wearing her flight suit, sweat drying at her collar, hair still flattened. "From her helmet, sit," Chun said without looking up. Her voice was sharper than usual, and Sarah felt her stomach knot. "How much do you know about Taliban intel capabilities?" Chun asked. "They're not idiots," Sarah replied. "They use cells. Adapt quick, coordinate. I've seen them change attack patterns mid-fight. Why?" Chun slid a folder across the desk. It was thick, stamped with red classification bands. Sarah opened it, read the first page, and froze. It was her attack vectors, her average response times. A preferred entry from the Northeast during convoy support. "They've been studying you, Phoenix," Chun said quietly, "for at least 6 weeks. Building a playbook." Sarah turned the next page. More detail. How she flew low during medevacs. Which radio frequencies she favored when stressed. Even notes on her voice patterns. She found the line that made her skin prickle. She laughs before risky maneuvers. Her mind flicked back to the time she'd done it half out of focus, the adrenaline spilling into a quick, sharp laugh before diving in. She hadn't even been aware it was a tell. They know your call sign. They know your voice. They've sketched your flight profiles like it's an instruction manual for shooting you down, Chun said. Sarah stared at the images of her own helicopter, taken from the ground with military-grade night optics. Who's backing this? These aren't village fighters with hand-me-down rifles. We think someone with professional training. And Sarah, Chun hesitated. Intercepts suggest they don't just want to kill you. They want to capture you alive. The room felt suddenly smaller. She'd seen what happened to prisoners out here. For a moment, the base hummed in the background. The ops center, the drone feeds, the constant noise of a war fought at every frequency. But all she could hear was that earlier voice in her headset. "The laughing ghost approaches." She forced her breathing steady. "Then let's flip it," she said. "If they think they know me, let's make them think they're right, while we feed them exactly what we want them to see." Far away, across the border, a man named Malik Hassan sat in a cave lit by the green glow of radios and signal scanners. He was no mountain illiterate. He had studied asymmetric warfare like an art form, learned from the Soviets, the Pac. How could they know so much? The coordinates, the time she lifted off, even the way she liked to angle in on a target down to the exact altitude. That question sat in Sarah's chest like a stone as she strapped back into her Apache for what should have been a low-threat escort mission. The Kunar Valley lay ahead, dark ridges folding into each other like clenched fists. The pre-mission intel had been almost boring. Secure route, routine convoy, minimal risk, which was exactly why it felt wrong. The first rocket confirmed it, and RPG Deceptor passed her canopy close enough for her to see the fins through the glass. The shockwaves slamming into the airframe. Holy! "Phoenix, they had our altitude dialed." Bulldog barked from the front seat. Sarah yanked the Apache hard right, climbing to throw off the aim, G-forces dragging at her shoulders. Below, muzzle flashes lit up spots the map had marked as clear. Whoever was down there wasn't improvising. They were placed like chess pieces. "Waiting Bulldog, ridgeline, danger close," she ordered. The chain gun thumped to life again, spraying death into the rocks. The targets disappeared under the impact, but her gut stayed tight. This wasn't some lucky shot. They'd been aiming at her, not just any helicopter. Convoy Alpha 7 came over the net, breathless and under fire. Phoenix, they knew exactly when and where to hit us, like they were waiting. Sarah's eyes moved between the thermal display and the real-world darkness beyond the glass. Fighters were scattered through positions she'd been told were cold 6 hours ago. And then the voice came over an enemy frequency, clear, deliberate English. The laughing ghost approaches from the northeast. Altitude 500 meters. RPG teams adjust for standard attack pattern. Her hand froze for half a beat on the controls. They weren't just predicting her. They were broadcasting it so she could hear, letting her know she was prey. Overwatch, Phoenix, enemies tracking me in real time, she said. Forcing her voice level, Major Chun's reply came tight and fast. We're seeing the same across other missions. Return to base now. The briefing room was hotter than it should have been. The air thick with recycled heat and the stale burn of instant coffee. Chun didn't waste time. It's worse, Phoenix. They're sharing your movements across multiple cells. Live. She handed over a transcript. Sarah read it once and felt her pulse spike. Phoenix departed Chapman at 0-8-4-7 hours, bearing northeast toward Convoy Alpha 7. Estimate arrival at 0-9-0-3 hours. All units prepare for standard left-hand attack pattern. She looked up. They knew my departure time and my route before I even cleared the perimeter. Spotters, Chun said. Likely with long optics and satcoms. They track you the second your rotors spin up. Map after map came out, red circles for suspected observation posts, blue marks for where she'd been seen. Then came the report that dug under her skin, an intelligent summary of her own flying, written like a military manual. Altitude preferences, vectors, reaction times in seconds, frequency habits, and, like a poisoned cherry on top, notes about the way she laughed before risky moves. Someone with serious training wrote this, Chun said, not a local militia commander. Sarah flipped through photographs, next telephoto shots from multiple angles, even one with her Apache glowing in a thermal scope during a medevac. They're building a profile, Sarah said, not just on what I do, on who I am in the cockpit. Exactly, and according to our intercepts, they're almost ready to act on it. Chun's eyes didn't leave hers. They're planning something specific to you, a trap designed around your patterns. Somewhere outside. Another Apache spun up for a night mission, its blades drumming the air. Sarah felt the sound differently. Now, not comfort, but a clock counting down, hundreds of miles away. In the mountains just over the Pakistani border, Malik Hassan traced a line with his finger across a topographical map. Dead Man's Canyon. The valley was a long, shallow S-curve, high walls on both sides, sparse cover. To enter it was to fly into a rifle barrel. His men had worked 3 nights to position 8 firing teams, each camouflaged and with pre-measured range cards. 2 SA-7 missile crews on the heights, RPG teams staggered lower, all overlapping, all inescapable. And at the far end, the bait, 3 burned-out vehicles posed as a U.S. convoy under attack. Smoke generators hidden in the rocks. Fighters ready to put on a convincing show for any drone that passed over. Hassan didn't smile much, but he did now. Phoenix would come. She always came when ground troops were bleeding, and she would come. The way she always did, low. From the northeast, descending into range to cut the enemy to pieces. And when she came, she wouldn't leave. At 5:30, Chapman's airfield was still wrapped in the gray hush before sunrise. Sarah had been asleep for less than 3 hours when the klaxon screamed through the base. She was moving before her eyes were open, pulling on her flight suit as the PA system boomed. All available aviation assets. Report to ops immediately. Convoy Bravo 6 in heavy contact. Urgent medevac. Ops was lit up like midday. Chun stood at the tactical display, her expression a warning in itself. Bravo 6 is under attack in Dead Man's Canyon. Multiple casualties, 3 urgent surgical cases. Sarah's eyes hit the map and locked. She knew that canyon. Every pilot did. Narrow walls. No maneuver room. Why did it feel almost rehearsed? The canyon walls loomed ahead, sheer rock streaked in the first gold of sunrise, their shadows swallowing the valley floor. Her display showed the convoy's heat signatures huddled behind those wrecked vehicles at the far end. Smoke curled in soft tendrils, drifting just right for thermal optics to read it as battle damage. Too perfect, too staged. "Bulldog, sweep me the walls," Sarah said, voice steady but low. He panned the optics, and even before he spoke, she could hear it in the tiny shift of his breathing. Positions at 1 o'clock and 11, not moving. Camouflage is good, but those are tubes. Phoenix, tall ones. SA-7 South. Surface-to-air missile launchers. Old but still lethal. She glanced at the range and angle. They had her if she stayed on the predictable approach vector, which is exactly what they expected her to do. In the mountains above, Malik Hassan crouched behind his binoculars, eyes locked on the tiny dark shape of the Apache moving toward the canyon mouth. Months of work had led to this moment. His spotter's reports had been accurate down to the second. Her angle, her speed, her descent rate, all just as the analysis predicted. He touched his radio mic. SA-7 Alpha. Beta, prepare for engagement. RPG teams, stand ready. Do not fire until my command. The air inside the Apache was tense but quiet. Sarah's hands moved over the controls, easing the bird lower, slower, as if she were committing to the trap. She didn't glance at Bulldog, but she knew he was watching his display like a hawk. "Phoenix," he said finally. "We're in the envelope." She knew. She also knew the men in those launch positions were waiting for her to commit just a little further. Enough that she couldn't climb out without taking a missile in the tail. Above them, Hassan listened to her voice over the intercept feed, calm as always. She was close enough now for the sound of her rotor blades to echo off the canyon walls, bouncing back in a rhythm that almost matched his own pulse. He wanted her alive, but he wouldn't hesitate if the shot was clean. "Hold," he told his men. Sarah's eyes flicked to the far end of the canyon where the convoy was supposedly pinned down. In the NVG glow, she could see muzzle flashes. Too evenly spaced, too controlled. Not a fighting act. Her heartbeat slowed. She took a breath and let her mouth curl into the smallest smile. She keyed her mic, not the secure channel, but the open frequency she knew they were listening to. The sound of her laughter spilled into the canyon. It was light, confident, almost playful. Bulldog didn't say a word. He knew that sound meant she'd just made a decision. In the rocks above, Hassan stiffened. It was the tell. She was about to make her move, but the tone was different this time. Not just confident something else, like she already knew how the story would end. Then her voice came, clear across every frequency. "You think I don't know you've been following me? Recording me? That I can't hear you breathing on this channel?" Hassan's hand froze on his mic. How? Multiple high-altitude contacts. One of his spotters shouted over the net, panic cutting the air. "Fast movers, diving!" Above the canyon, 4 F-16s dropped through the morning sky like blades. They'd been holding at altitude for over an hour, silent and invisible to Hassan's outdated radar. Every position his men had taken, every launcher, every comms relay, they'd all been mapped in advance. Sarah's laughter was still in the air as the first GM-65 Maverick slammed into SA-7 Alpha's position, erasing it in a sun-bright flash. "Bulldog, paint me every firing position," she said, voice now crisp and fast. On it, Hassan's radio was chaos-shouted warnings, calls for retreat, half-complete commands drowned out by the scream of incoming ordnance. The second missile hit Beta's launch. The smoke still hung low in the canyon, clinging to the jagged walls as if the air itself didn't want to move. Heat shimmered from the blackened craters where missile launchers and RPG nests had been only minutes before. The silence was the loudest thing left. Sarah kept the Apache in a slow, deliberate orbit above the wreckage. Her eyes moved over the thermal display, not rushing it, not trusting the quiet. It was habit. In the first weeks here, she'd learned the Taliban had a way of playing dead until you got close. But this time, there was no movement. No flicker of heat that wasn't cooling metal or stone. "Bulldog, confirm sweep," she said. "Thermals are negative. No electronics, no human signatures," Bulldog replied. His voice had the edge of a man who just watched a perfect kill zone become a graveyard. "We pulled their teeth, Phoenix." She didn't answer right away. Her mind wasn't on the dead. It was on the living. The ones who'd be running now, scattering into the hills. The ones who carry the story with them up in the rocks above the canyon. Malik Hassan's world had collapsed in less than 2 minutes. The command cave was gone, obliterated in the first strike. The comms equipment, the precious intercept gear smuggled over months, reduced to twisted aluminum and shards of green. Circuit board. His fighters, what was left of them, were scattered, hauling wounded men down goat trails in desperate retreats. None of them were thinking about revenge now. Survival was the only thought. He sat with his back against a rock, the binoculars still around his neck. His hands shook, not from fear, but from something colder. They'd been inside his head. They'd known his timing, his readiness, the moment he'd give the order. They'd given him exactly the data he wanted, exactly the patterns he thought he was clever enough to exploit, and then they'd used it to crush him. Hassan had fought the Soviets, the Northern Alliance, the Americans. He'd outlived airstrikes, raids, betrayals, but in all those years, he'd never been played. Not like this, somewhere above the canyon. The sound of the Apache's rotors began to fade, but the echo of the pilot's laugh sharp, almost musical, would not. By the time Sarah touched down at Chapman, the early sun was warming the flight line. Ground crews moved in without hesitation, fueling, inspecting, pulling the dust from intakes. To them, it was just another turnaround. But the air inside the ops building was different. Chun was waiting at the door to the briefing room. She didn't speak until the door was shut behind them. "Battle damage assessment just came in," she said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Primary targets, Alpha through Hotel, all eliminated. Secondary positions clean." Sarah glanced at the imagery. The canyon looked like a moonscape. Every firing point she'd seen now a black scar in the stone. No survivors? A few, but they won't be coordinating anything bigger than hiding for the next 6 months. Chum leaned forward, her tone changing. "You wanted to see how they thought they had you." She brought up a file, Hassan's own intercept log, pulled from a surviving data card recovered by a drone team. Sarah skimmed the entries. It was eerie, reading about herself through the enemy's eyes. Phoenix left-hand attack favored. Northeast approach for convoys. Laughs before high-risk maneuver. The last entry was from an hour ago. Phoenix approaching Dead Man's Canyon. Standard descent profile. Prepare to fire. Sarah sat back, letting out a slow breath. "They were convinced," she said. "Because we let them be," Chun replied. "Every intercept we knew they could hear, we tailored. Every mission profile, every maneuver. Even the tell," Sarah's eyes flicked up. "The laugh?" Chun smiled faintly. "You really do it. We just made sure they'd notice. Left it in. Even amplified it a couple of times on recorded channels." Sarah shook her head. "So you let them think they were mapping me." "And all the while, we were mapping them," Chun finished. "Every time they repositioned a spotter, every time they updated their files, we tracked it. We even fed them the canyon coordinates through a secure convoy briefing they intercepted." Sarah thought about Hassan, whoever he was, watching her fly into what he thought was the kill box of his life. She wondered if he'd realized in that last moment, before the missiles came, that he'd never been the hunter. Chun tapped the tablet. This wasn't just about taking out weapons. This was about taking the idea of certainty away from them. They thought they could know you. Now they know that what they see might be exactly what we want them to see. Sarah let that sink in. Out here, in a war fought as much in mines as in valleys. That shift. 3 months later, the air at Fort Rucker felt thick with humidity and the faint, constant smell of pine. It was a far cry from the thin, dry bite of the Hindu Kush, but Sarah still caught herself scanning the sky as if she expected a plume of smoke to rise from behind the tree line. The Army Aviation School auditorium was full rows of flight suits, the occasional set of dress uniforms, eyes sharp with curiosity. Most of them were younger than she'd been on her first deployment on. The screen behind her, an overhead image of Dead Man's Canyon, glowed in sharp relief. The scars of craters pocked the terrain like burns on skin. Sarah stepped to the lectern, the DFC ribbon on her chest catching the light. She didn't start with the usual thanks or greetings. In combat, she began, predictability is death, but sometimes apparent predictability, when used deliberately, can be a weapon. She let the words hang there, in the stillness. She could hear the faint scratch of pens against notepads. When you fly in a combat zone, the enemy will study you. They will watch, listen, record. They'll learn your habits and wait for you to repeat them. You can't stop them from trying. What you can do is make sure what they're learning is what you want them to learn. She changed the slide. Now, instead of terrain, there were intercepted Taliban notes, the same ones Chun had shown her, stripped of sensitive marks, flight profiles, attack preferences, annotated in the enemy's own handwriting. They thought they were learning me, she said, her voice even. They thought my laugh before a high-risk move was a tell that I always came in from the northeast, that I had a favorite way to circle an engagement. She paused, glancing at the notes as if they still made her skin prickle. They were right, because I let them be right. And every time they thought they had proof, they were stepping deeper into our plan. Another slide, this one of the destroyed canyon. The wreckage almost unrecognizable. We didn't just destroy their weapons that day. We destroyed their certainty, and certainty, in this kind of war, is worth more than any launcher or rifle. The room stayed silent for a moment after she stopped speaking, the weight of the lessons settling in. Then the questions began. One young pilot in the third row raised a hand. "Ma'am, how do you know when you're the one being watched?" Sarah thought about the first time she'd seen those glowing rectangles in enemy hands, aimed at her instead of the fight. You don't until you start asking yourself that question every time. You fly, and if you're not asking it, you're already predictable, half a world away. The survivors of Dead Man's Canyon kept their own kind of lessons in a cold, dim room in a village deep in the tribal belt. A group of fighters sat cross-legged on worn rugs. The story came out in fragments, what they'd seen, what they'd heard. The woman's voice, the sudden roar of jets, the missiles striking from nowhere. They called her Shaitan Mascara, the smiling demon. Some said she could see them through the rock. Others swore she could hear their radios from miles away. One man, his arm in a crude sling, said nothing at first. He'd been closest to Hassan when the first strike came. He'd seen the commander's face at the moment he understood. Not fear, not anger, just realization. He told no one where Hassan had gone after that day, only that the man who'd once spoken with the confidence of a chess master now walked like someone who'd lost not a battle, but the game itself. At Fort Rucker, Sarah lingered. After the lecture, students filed past her with salutes and thanks. War stories travel fast in the mountains. By the time the snow began dusting the high passes, the name Shaitan Mascara had reached villages Sarah had never heard of and ridges she'd never flown over. Fighters spoke of the American woman who laughed over the radio in the middle of an ambush and turned the trap on its makers. For some, it was just another campfire tale exaggerated in the retelling, stripped of detail. But for those who had been there in Dead Man's Canyon, the memory was carved deep. The sound of that laugh was something they couldn't shake. Even in sleep, in the tribal town of Asadabad, 3 men sat in the back room of a tea house. whispering over their cups. One still carried shrapnel in his leg from the strike. Another had lost 2 brothers to the chain gun's fire. The third had been part of Hassan's outer perimeter that day, watching helplessly from too far away to warn them in time. Their words kept circling back to one point. Hassan had promised victory. Instead, he'd led them into annihilation. Hassan himself had not returned to Asadabad since that morning. He'd gone deeper into the mountains, far from the radio networks he once commanded. The intercept equipment was gone. His hand-picked specialists scattered or dead. In his makeshift shelter, he kept a single object from the canyon, a fragment of binocular lens, the glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern. He'd been holding them when the first missile hit. His pride, sharper than any wound, gnawed at him in the long nights. He could still see the Apache banking into view, the laugh spilling over the radio. She'd spoken directly to him. He was sure of it. He'd been certain he'd known her better than she knew herself. Now he wasn't certain of anything back at Fort Rucker. Sarah was halfway through a rotation as an instructor when Major Chun's name popped up on her secure comm. "Phoenix, we've got chatter from SIGINT," Chun's voice came, even over the encrypted line. "You might want to hear this one." Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Same network?" "No, a different group, but they're using the name. And they're asking questions about your patterns." Sarah leaned back. "So they're trying to finish what Hassan started. Maybe. Or maybe they just want the ghost's head on their wall," Chen said. "Either way, the theater's changing. We're seeing better coordination, tighter comms discipline. Someone's organizing them again." Sarah closed the laptop slowly. She'd been off the front for months, but the pull was immediate, like the sound of a rotor starting up in the distance. The new AO was farther south, different ridges, different river valleys, but the feeling was the same. On her first flight back, Sarah scanned the ground with that old, cautious rhythm. Every village rooftop, every ridge line, every shadow was a possible scope, a possible spotter. Bulldog was back in the front seat. The old easy banter still there, but she could tell he felt it too. "They're quiet today," he said after a while. "Too quiet for a place that's been hot all week." Sarah's hand adjusted the collective by a hair. "That's the thing about quiet, Bulldog. It's not always peace. Sometimes it's The first sign they were watching again came not from a satellite feed or intercepted comms, but from a rumor. A ground team, moving through a village in the south, had overheard 2 men arguing in the open about when the laughing ghost would appear. Not if by the time that made it back to the ops center, Chun already had the intercepts on her desk. Different voices, different dialects, but the same methodical collection of data, headings, altitudes, times to target. The new network was building a file. Just like Hassan's had, Sarah stood over Chun's shoulder, scanning the raw transcripts. "Same handwriting," she murmured. Chun looked up. "Not Hassan. We've cross-referenced every voice. But whoever this is, they've inherited his playbook, and they're updating it." Sarah tapped a page. "Then let's give them something worth updating." Over the next 2 weeks, she flew almost daily. But nothing was routine, not really. Every mission had a purpose beyond its stated tasking. Sometimes she came in low and from the northeast, just like the legend said. Other times, she took an unexpected vector that made it look accidental, a weather diversion, a fuel calculation, a late call from a ground unit. She kept the tell alive, too. That laugh, the one Chun had once amplified, dripped into the fear. It comes at just the right moments. Never too often, never too forced. Bulldog caught on fast. "You're building them a puzzle," he said one night over post-flight coffee. "I'm building them a mirror," Sarah corrected. "One that shows them what they want to see, 2 valleys away." The man in the gray shawl kept filling his notebook, and while he didn't know it, Sarah was writing the pages for him. His reports went up the chain to a commander who had never met Hassan but had heard the legend of the canyon. To this commander, bringing down the laughing ghost would be more than a tactical win. It would be a symbolic one. Proof that the Americans could bleed even where they thought themselves untouchable. In a small, unlit room far from the front, Hassan sat cross-legged, listening to a cheap transistor radio. The voices were new, but the language was familiar. Altitude, headings, they were hunting her again. Part of him wanted to stay silent, to let them make their attempt and see what became of them. But another part, quieter, heavier, knew he couldn't. Not because he wanted revenge, though that fire still smoldered, but because they didn't understand what they were walking into. He had built the first hunt. He had felt her turn it inside out in seconds. He had seen the precision of her counterattack. The morning of the operation was clear, the air over Helmand shimmering in the heat. From the air, the valley looked harmless, wide, sunlit, cut by the slow curve of the river. But Sarah could feel the trap in it before she saw the first flicker of movement on her sensors. The Pin Patrol's transmission was thin and shaky. Too shaky. Phoenix, this is Able 4. Taking fire from 2 ridges. We need air cover now. The voice broke off under the sound of gunfire, then returned. In a rush. We can't hold much longer. Sarah looked at Bulldog. Same as last time? He didn't need to answer. The setup was obvious on the southern ridge. The man in the gray shawl crouched beside his spotter, eyes glued to the Apache's approach vector in his notebook. The latest page was half filled already. Speed, angle, altitude, just a little closer, and the kill box would close. Farther back, the commander, tall, lean, proud, watched through binoculars, certain that this time the legend would end here. Sarah's voice came over the open channel, calm and easy. Able 4, Phoenix is inbound. Hold your ground. Bulldog's thermal sweep painted the firing positions in pale gold. 8-man teams, 2 ridges, SA-18s. They're waiting on the signal. Sarah eased the collective, keeping her descent steady. To anyone watching, it looked like she was flying blind into the kill zone, but 20 miles above and east. 3 F-35s were already locked on. Viper 1, you're green, Sarah said, her voice flat. The first strike came without warning, no roar of engines first, just the instant flash of impact on the eastern ridge. The spotter's scope clattered to the rocks as shrapnel tore through his position. The man in the gray shawl flinched, the sudden shift from hunter to hunted ripping through him. Second ridge, left. Bulldog called, already painting the target. Sarah banked hard, the Apache's chain gun stitching fire across the rock face. Fighters scattered in panic, their formations collapsing in seconds. The F-35s rolled in again, their ordnance tearing out the last of the air defense before it ever fired a shot. From a low ridge at the mouth of the valley, Hassan watched it unfold. He had come alone, unseen, to see for himself if the ghost still haunted these skies. She did, and she was even faster now. The commander's plan was gone in under 2 minutes. His men were running, his launchers smoking wreckage. Hassan almost pitied him, almost. He knew the moment the other man would understand, that terrible, silent second when the trap you've built turns inside out in your hands. It was the same second Hassan had lived in Dead Man's Canyon. Sarah climbed out of the valley, the patrol's false signal now silent. She knew there were eyes on her from somewhere far off. She could feel it. Over the open channel, she let the laugh out, not loud, not long, but enough.